yourself at the level that you wanted to change. So if you wanted to change an individual from one timeline to another, you would have to put in as much energy as it took to separate that individual's molecules from the one timeline, and then as much energy as it took to shove them into the other timeline, which would be considerable. And because bear in mind what's occurring under this illusion of the multiple timelines. When you extract a person from the timeline, you're altering that timeline from that point on. The interactions, their participation in the timeline wouldn't exist. And when you shove them in, you have to create a hole, and then you've altered the other timeline totally. So the idea that this fellow out there, Burish, Dan Burish, he had this big dog and pony show where he tried to convince everybody that he had saved us all and changed the catastrophic timeline by doing some weird ass ritual in Vegas. Well, let me tell you that to change from a timeline for everybody, for a solar system, into another timeline, imagine the energy that would be required. And I'm here to tell you, Dan Burish ain't got that energy. I don't care what he's done. So that, in my way of thinking, that kind of stuff cannot occur. The idea of shifting timelines and all of this is just basically bogus. Well, first off, they don't exist. And we've been proving that as we go along, because time is subjective, and we're all participating in it in the same way that all the molecules participate in the formation of an ocean. Now, when the ocean moves, none of the molecules have any damn choice about it. And that's kind of the way it is with us relative to time. When the ocean of time shifts, we all shift with it. But we experience that time and participate in that time purely subjectively. And I think we've been going through a lot of these. We do it seasonally, we do it geographically, we do it relationally, in the sense of emotionally, where people around you cause your time to just drag on because they're like me and they won't shut up and they just go and go and go and go. Or they're just a real downer and they've got issues, that kind of thing, right? And so they alter your perception of time. Or the other way around, it's you're male and they're a staggeringly good-looking woman, and you spend some time with them and you say, wait a second, I was only with her for 5 minutes and actually 2 hours had gone by. So that's just the way it is. Also, we have cyclic variation in time, which are really weird if you think about it. If you were up frequently at 3 a.m. and you happen to be up at the 3 a.m. in the first of the month, you'll find that it feels the same as the first of the next month, but it actually feels different than 3 a.m. at the end of that month. So 3 a.m. on the 1st of January is going to feel a lot like 3 a.m. at the 1st of February in a different way than 3 a.m. at the 1st of January feels from 3 a.m. at the end of January. It's this internal perception that we're applying to time. We're influencing our time through our perceptions. And so it's this whole idea of good times and bad times is true. Subjectively, we actually own time. We contribute to that. And so this is actually the whole point of the Vedic and the yogic and Taoistic approach of separating your self from your emotions and attachment and so on. You can alter all of this and you experience the ever-present now. You alter your perception of time at that level. And this is another point of meditation and going down those paths, is that your ability to deal with time and its influences on you and your influences on it change as a result of those paths, of those techniques. Time is the aggregate. It's all of us conducting ourselves as individuals, and there is only this one timeline because it's basically an ocean. It's not an individual stream coming from outside the materium that flows through and you can jump from one to the other. That idea is bogus. What in fact we have is the idea of this ocean of sloshing around time, and every point that a new little bloop comes into existence, we get a new addition of time to the materium. So that having been said, let's bring it back to the my contention here. My premise is that because we experience time subjectively, and we can prove this for everybody, for all beings, grass, rocks, any kind of being you want to name, that at least on Earth that I can think about, can all experience time subjectively. And so since it is subjective, then we know it's not objective. It's not the ocean in which we'd all feel that same wave the same way and have to struggle within our various capabilities on that wave. In this case, many of us won't feel the wave. You can have a guy standing right next to you and he's in good mood, and he's going to have the time pass a lot faster than you, in terms of, because he's a surfer and you're not, he's going to enjoy the experience and you're not, and so on. So in any event, time is entirely subjective at that level. There is not a separate timeline, there's not separate time streams, and so on. If that is the case, if my premise is correct, then what was it that Courtney Brown's experiment was actually measuring? Because bear in mind, Courtney Brown and the farsight.org guys thought they were measuring the idea of multiple timelines, and Courtney Brown is under the impression that he's actually proved the universe operates as though multiple timelines exist. And I'm saying that what he was actually measuring, in spite of how he phrased the experiment per se, in itself, he actually was measuring the emotional participation of us in time. Now, he, in his mind, sliced it and applied a reductionist value and labeled things timeline A and timeline B. But merely because he labeled it does not mean that universe is going to cooperate and create timelines for him. The label is independent of the reality. The Tao that can be named is not the Tao. And so the labels that he applied have a tendency to color our perception and make us think that the timelines exist, but if we apply different labels, we can get a different view of what's going on. If we looked at his timeline A and timeline B, instead of being separate, mutually exclusive rivers, and you were in one or in the other, or in some further timeline not described in their experiment, I'm saying that their experiment actually describes the reality that we have, the single ocean of time, the single timeline, if you will. There's never been any other timeline, and that what he has labeled as timeline A and timeline B is merely the delta between the impact of the emotion of the reality of remote viewing on the general populace and it's just the degree of that. It's not the delta, it's the degree of that. It's the degree of the reaction to remote viewing. Now, this can be ascertained by us examining his results in this way. And if we postulate that his premise of the remote viewing being taken into consideration within the remote viewers' work themselves, then if that premise was part of the nature of the experiment, then we can postulate also, and we actually have proof within the experiment that as it came out, that what is occurring is a level of remote viewing participation in the formation of the events within time and our reaction to them. So in other words, instead of a timeline A and a timeline B, what the farsight.org experiment actually is measuring, in my opinion, is how much traction, if you will, how much publicity the whole idea gets, and the whole participation of everybody's emotion into the whole upcoming series of Earth changes. So what he's measuring with one timeline is where no one says anything in mainstream media, and nobody really reacts. The universe comes along, kicks our ass, and a lot of people die, and no one takes any personal responsibility, and we run around and, oh my God, what has happened to us, kind of a thing. But in the other timeline, it's slightly different. There's people around, there's still devastation and so on, but if we want to think about it, it is as though a measured response from the remote viewing, from his experiment itself, and from my work and from the work of other remote viewers. I'm not a remote viewer, but I mean other remote viewers from the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild, and all of the combination of all of this future viewing is felt by the population to the extent that there is enough of a reaction that a degree of loss of life is prevented. So let me present you with another premise. I'm stating that basically what we're doing here with Courtney Brown's 2012 experiment is that we're recreating what happened with Banda Aceh and the plate crack there and the horrible loss of life within the islands and then the all around Indian Ocean and so on. But you note there was those islands where there was very little loss of life. There was only one individual, I think, on this one island that was so debilitated they could not move, and everybody else moved to higher ground. Well, everybody else in that sense, in our analogy, reacted to the remote viewing image of the waters coming, and they beat feet and they got it to the top of that hill, along with all the damn animals. And so if we thought of the animals as the remote viewers, they were the guides for the indigenous population of these islands, and they got up to the top of the hills, the waves came, and then these and went away, and these guys came down. So from their viewpoint, their view of the Banda Aceh quake was an entirely different subjective experience of reality than was the reality that impacted all those people that were killed in the tsunamis in all the other instances of that particular event. And so if we wanted to look at that as a smaller version of what's coming, then we are seeing different outcomes in the same place, not because of timelines, but because of variations in the spread of our emotions and how they affect the time we're in. So if enough humans said that, well, Clif is, he may be a nutter, but he's not wrong. And Courtney Brown may be bald, but he's not wrong. And Dick Allgaier may be a TV personality in Hawaii, but he's the best damn remote viewer around, and he's not wrong. And so and I'm just a regular guy here, and this is my premise. And if enough of us sat around and said that, and we were sitting around in California, and you're watching your football game, it wouldn't be football, but you'd be watching some sports game, and you feel an earthquake, a little tremor, and you think in the back of your mind, old bald Courtney and old bald Clif, maybe they're not wrong. To hell with this particular sports game. We just had a 4.5, and it's still shaking and quivering a bit. I'm going to hop in my Jeep and hightail it into the Sierras. Well, if we got enough people thinking that, and we had enough people talking to each other ahead of time, you would get a generalized reaction the way that they had in those islands in Banda Aceh, such that I think that when the trigger came, enough people would react, and this would be the outcome, in the more favorable outcome in the remote viewing experiment that was conducted by Courtney Brown. And so the unfavorable one is where we don't talk about it, where everybody says, oh, Clif's, he's just so damn screwy and strange. I'm not listening to that bastard. And geez, have you seen Courtney Brown? There isn't a hair on that guy's head. I can't trust him. And I can't even see if he's got eyebrows. Boy, I can't trust anybody who I can't see their eyebrows. And I don't even know what this Dick Allgaier looks like, but I ain't believing his ass no matter what. And so we don't do that, and we sit around and we drown. Or a lot of us would. And those that were up ever so slightly higher would be kicked a little bit further into the process, and all of this kind of thing. And so really that's all it's measuring, I think, that the Courtney Brown experiment here. And that's why the time component is really critical. Because in Courtney Brown's viewpoint, at least in terms of how he's expressed it, he's relatively passive about this, because he thinks that, well, we're in a timeline. We could be in timeline A, we could be in timeline B, or we could be in some timeline that I have yet to describe, and I won't know about it until I get there. And I think that is the wrong way to look at this, because I think time does not exist independent of our participation in it. It's entirely subjective, and that a lot of these things, the string theory and dimensions and all this other stuff, is entirely bogus. That being the case, then it comes down to, Courtney Brown's experiment is showing that before June 1, Earth's going to get the shit kicked out of it. We're going to get some kind of an event. Well, guess what? February 15th, we got DA14, I think, which is this meteor that's going to whiz by. I think it's in March. There's this other meteor, and then we've got a big-ass comet coming that James McCanney says is, got companions, and the thing could be the size of the planet Earth for all we know. And also, by the way, I do know for a fact that NASA is really worried about DA14 on February 15th. That they're not yet freaking, but they're in there tweaking, trying to check their numbers to see how their monkey minds are doing in terms of whether or not it's going to smack into us. So that being the case, I think maybe these guys know. I also think that they're participating in our subjective reality by trying to keep us not in the know for their own reasons. I'm not saying NASA particularly. I'm saying the nasty powers that be. But I also think that we're at a point here where if people examine the nature of time, and then when they were going look at the far sight experiments, and they didn't think of it as timeline A and timeline B as being discrete things, but if they actually thought of it as being, with foreknowledge being blabbed about and without foreknowledge being blabbed about, you get a different perspective on it. And I think really seriously if you examine the nature of time and really gnaw on it, you'll see that it is entirely subjective, and we do participate in it. And since we're participating in it, maybe at the level of, the experiments that Art Bell had conducted with the coast-to-coast audience and so on to move hurricanes and crap, maybe we could all do away with the global coastal event if we all sat around and decided we didn't need it. I don't know how such a thing would occur, and I haven't even thought about the energies involved and all of that kind of stuff. I'm sure it's